Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Joe Levy, CEO and founder of Uplevel. We are an engineering effectiveness company. I was an engineer a long time ago and moved into various business roles and founded Uplevel in 2018 to focus on the challenge that engineering leadership has. We'll talk about that a bit more. And of course, you can go to our website and other materials. But really, the agenda today is to talk to someone that I met about a year and a half ago that I've been very impressed with, Jason Yip. Jason, what I thought you could do is maybe give us a little background about yourself, tell us who you are, how you got to where you are, and sort of what you do today.
So I guess like starting out, I'm kind of an old school extreme programming agile guy. First heard about extreme programming back when I was still in grad school. And one of my colleagues pointed out Ron Jeffries had this website called xprogramming.com. One of my colleagues said, you should check out this article about extreme programming. And that's kind of where it started. We just started talking about that all the time to anyone who would listen, got involved in the online forums on Usenet on the original wiki.
Yeah, right. They
Yeah,
don't have.
it's kind of funny. Like, I don't even know how many people even know about the original wiki now because they only know Wikipedia. But yeah, there used to be a time before Wikipedia when just this idea of an editable website, like, that was a new concept. But that's where the extreme programming crowd hung out. Then we kind of got into agile. You had like things that was like comp. I guess the equivalent today would be like Reddit, kind of.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
But yeah, there was like comp.object, comp.software engineering, and that's where
yes.
we would have arguments about extreme programming, which is kind of wacky now. Even today, people think they come up with a new argument and say, "No, I argued about this 20 years ago. I already heard this before," kind of stuff. So it's kind of weird. But that got me into the community. My advisor helped set up the first extreme programming conference in Sardinia. Met up people, got hired by ThoughtWorks because I'm originally from Canada. Got hired by ThoughtWorks, moved to Chicago for about a year, went back to Canada, and then moved to ThoughtWorks in Australia, where I was there for about 12ish years for joining Spotify in New York City. I was there for about 8 years, and then I'm currently working as a senior manager in product engineering at Grainger since March last year, which is kind of a bit of shift because I've mostly done software stuff, and Grainger does industrial supplies. So now there's like a physical component of that. It's kind of interesting because I've been along the way, I was also very interested in lean. They talk about lean as in moving stuff as opposed to just the lean
Yeah.
software stuff. So it's kind of interesting to get that. You get people who get concepts and then you're just helping translate to the software side of things.
What particularly interested me about a lot of what I see in your Medium post. So,
Okay.
for those that don't know, Jason has a fairly active Medium blog, and we'll put links in the show notes here and definitely encourage you to go follow that. One of the things that I see you write about in your various topics is focus. How do you balance that thinking when every problem is different, every solution to it is different, and yet you have to stay focused and get something out the door in some
Yeah.
reasonable time frame?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this before. I think there's this kind of framing sometimes when people think focus, they're almost thinking about what they're losing. And I think that's sort of the fundamental trap. So when you go, I could potentially do all of it. And by focusing, I've lost all the stuff that I could potentially do. And there's this thing of just realizing, no, you're not going to get anything. And you have to decide, given all these things, where can you direct your effort to create the most leverage? And that's what focus is about. Focus isn't just do one thing rather than 10 things. It's pick the right thing that gives me the most impact for my limited effort, which is
Interesting.
almost always less than the 10 things. The point is where.
Let's unpack that a bit because I think that's a really good concept, but it sounds hard practically.
Oh,
A fictitious dev team, someone listening out there, they
yep.
are assigned 10 things to work on
Yep.
over the next sprint, a month, whatever it is.
Sure.
And they're all that, they didn't get on a list because many of them are unimportant, but
Yep.
certainly they have some varying level. What's your approach to say, okay, two of these things can be ignored, one of these things is absolutely, like how do you
Sure.
kind of get the team rallied around that?
Yeah. This can get really complicated. So
Yeah,
I'm going to go the easiest version is this team is, let's say they're not mature good enough that I don't have to say anything. If they were really good, I don't have to say anything. They know how to deal with this.
that's right.
So the top level advice is just, hey, we can talk about here's all these things you could do. You only have so much effort that you can allocate. Think about that and just work out how to maximize impact. Like that's all I want you to do. Maximize impact.
Right.
Right? Some teams, that's enough. Good. Like
Yeah,
I just had to kind of push them over the edge. Done. That's the easiest one. The one below
right.
that, they go, I don't know how to do that. A lot of that is to understand the context of every request, right? It's not just someone asked you to do something. Why did they ask you to do that? What does it give us? Do you understand the thing that you're providing and how it fits within the broader context of the organization you're working in? And you might have to go, okay, I'm going to have to walk you through that because you don't know how to reason about that, which is why I'm talking to you. Because otherwise, I wouldn't need to. Because I would
Right.
just say, hey, just do this thing. So that means they don't really understand their capability and their place within the organization. So we have to kind of talk through that. And then I might go even further than that and go, oh, even with that, they don't know how to deal with it. Then we start going, okay, maybe we play with some tricks here. There are some things which are more practical stuff. There's another director I talked to, and sometimes I'm going, you know what? Sometimes I don't really want to have people dynamically negotiate every decision. Sometimes you just
Right.
kind of make a close enough type call. So you say, I'm going to do a strategic allocation, and then you do it that way. And then in the long run, it's close enough. And I save a lot of time in the negotiation argument. Um,
Okay. So let's take the. I'll just do. I'm going to do the assumptive. You're close to the top of that chain. Like every team by design, you have some new hires or someone a little
sure.
younger
But I'm
versus.
relying on the senior people to keep them in line. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But you do have some people that are
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe still learning and coming up that
Yep.
ramp, so you have to sort of balance that out. You're halfway into that, and they're like, now that we're halfway through this problem, actually, they're devs, right? Like devs at heart. The best thing about this whole world is like, look, I've built half the Lego blocks, but I thought of a new way to build the castle that's even more fun, right?
Sure.
Like, and they kind of start re-architecting it as it's going.
Yeah.
How do you balance that pressure?
When that happens, most of the time, I would suspect that they're being cut off from the consequences of it. So they don't, there's a open loop somewhere,
Right.
right? This is why like really experienced people, they kind of go, don't do that, right? It's like for new people, I'm going to try to get them to go through that loop as quickly as possible so they feel it,
Sure.
right? And this
Sure.
is why you do things like you're going to try to get something shipped to production. You're going to do a stint, which will be supported because you might not be ready yet. Like do an on call, so you kind of get a feel for it, and then you closing loop. So when we have a decision, you're not just thinking about right now. You're thinking about the entire loop, which helps. That doesn't like it doesn't mean you're perfect because sometimes you just can't anticipate it, but at least you go, oh, no, I understand that this call has a consequence, which is not going to be someone else's consequence. It's going to be mine because I'm part of this circle of life, and they make better calls.
Yeah.
I've always been like pairing a lot. These days, everyone
Sure.
does ensemble, but I was like, you pair, so you were never on your own either, but it's still like there was no expectation that it would be someone else's problem. It was yours.
Mm,
So, like that, generally, that's how I go. Like when people say, "Hey, I'm going to do this thing because it's fun," almost always they're sacrificing future self,
that's right.
which
That's
you
right.
don't tend to do when future self gets beat up a few times.
Yeah.
Um,
That's totally fair. I think the challenge that I hear a lot in that is you don't want to stifle the like maybe it actually was a much better idea and the path we were on was, problematic for some other reason.
right? Like there's this broad trend. People talk about, "Hey, when do you just do boring stuff versus
Yes.
that stuff?"
I mean,
Like,
there's no perfect answer here,
yeah,
I
yeah,
get, but
yeah. It's hard. And if we go super meta, because this becomes a strategic call, not just software stuff. When do you rely on like there will be a point when you go, hey, right now I'm going to use reliable technology because I'm not going to try to get advantage through the technology. I'm doing something else. But over time, in a broad sense, if you don't, at some point, up and coming technology can dramatically just kind of changes the underlying context.
yes.
And then if
Sure.
you miss that, then that's dangerous. So you go, hey, how do I deal with that? And that's almost like at a strategic level. I almost don't even want a team necessary to worry about that. It's more like, hey, we'll think about this more broadly. Because you could do stuff like, okay, we're going to do some bake offs.
Oh, sure. Right.
I don't know which one is going to win.
Do an A/B test.
Some people don't actually like to be on new stuff. Like people keep think,
Right.
hey, every software engineer is like super innovative. No, some software engineers look at some of the new stuff and say this stuff is garbage. Like there's no tooling,
Right.
there's no libraries. This thing is super unreliable. Every time I do something, it's not working yet because I haven't built it yet. It's super buggy, and they like the thing that's sort of fleshed out and they optimize it. They're kind of in that mindset. So it's not like the B team, A team. You just go, oh no, some people like to play with the new stuff. Okay, I'll do that, and some people like to play with the solid, reliable stuff, and they do that. And we can kind of do a little bit of a bake off. And you're gonna have people who can kind of cross the line a bit, and they'll have to help with that connection. So you can do that more systemically. I know some teams that do this where they say, "Hey, we're gonna allow for it's 10% magic. Everything else
Yes.
solid, 10%
That
magic." That might not be enough with some more dramatic stuff. Like
right.
I think these days people LLM, some of that is not a 10% problem.
No, 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 no. We've seen much more than that
Yeah.
for sure.
It's like trying to get a 10% PhD. It
Right.
doesn't work that way
Yeah.
because it's not a straightforward answer. You actually, this is sort of what I was talking about before. You have to actually reason about this
Yeah.
because there's no universal heuristic that just works.
No,
But that's
that
kind
is
of the point.
a good segue. So we've been talking a lot about the technical side and managing the people actually doing the work and thinking about there's a set of problems and how do we just scope those problems enough that they can run, but not so much that it's micromanagement. And love some of your tips for how to think that through a bit. Now let's talk about the other half of what makes engineering management so just impossibly getting it from all sides is the business side. Something comes along and says, "Oh my goodness, there's some customer fire drill or an incident or
Sure.
something happened, and we need some support out of your team or some new features right away, or you have to pivot into
Yep.
this. But by the way, we're not giving up on the thing we originally asked you to do as well."
Sure.
How do you face that? What are your tips for those out there listening to say, okay, it's barely enough to do to keep the team focused. Now I also have to deal with these sort of external threats.
The ideal thing is there's no real separation, right? So, and this is sort of what we're trying to do here, right? Let's say we have like Grainger's branches, so like kind of retail stores, and they have
Yeah.
problems that are associated with just dealing with a retail store and the software there, the point of sale system, inventory management within the store, all this kind of stuff, right? The ideal version is technology person. I hang out with the branch people all the time. They know me because I'm there all the time,
Right.
right? Then the conflict's not the same because it's not like they have a problem I don't know about it. I know about the problem. I already know they have an issue. I know what the long-term issues are. We already know about it because we talk about it a lot, right?
Right.
That's the easiest one. Then you don't really have the separation. It's like, hey, how do we do this trade-off? We're already talking about short and long-term goals together. So I don't have this. Like it's not a separation
Yeah.
thing,
That's the
right?
dream.
The
Right.
path there is you have to do certain things, but I like that's the idea though. Like Granger talks about this, we win as a team kind of thing, which granted is sometimes a generic thing, but you understand what it takes, right? Because it's not just software tech to stuff. There's a lot of moving parts to make sure, like, hey, someone gets a thing that shows up on time. It's a lot of moving parts to say, hey, this team's together. We're kind of on the same page. We all have our different roles, but we're scoring in the same game kind of thing. Like sometimes people on the software tech side, they're still in the there's this kind of barrier type thing, and that's not one team. Like you think you're playing a different game, but you're not.
Right.
Um, so let's say that's the easiest one is that you're already close. Now, how do you get there? Like again, one level back, they're asking for stuff that I wasn't already aware of because I wasn't keyed in. One of the things that we're looking at right now is just at least saying, hey, here's a regular sync with all
Hmm.
the stakeholders, all the people, part of that same kind of capability on all sides, not just the technology, all of them. And we're together and we just talking through all the stuff. Like, what are you seeing out there? Because there's all these crazy stuff that happens in the field, which I always talk to people like everything works in the lab, which is like our desks and stuff. But we've
Sure.
got stuff they're out there. I can't even guarantee what temperature the thing is going to be at. So you need to know that context. So having more contact helps you do this. At one point, I was talking about like, hey, what's a fundamental kind of agile principle that people don't really get? Um, there's an old colleague of mine. He called it closing the distance between customers and developers.
Yeah.
I called it closing the distance between problems and problem solvers because I don't care what you're doing. It's like
Yeah.
there's a problem, there's problem solvers, and you need to close that gap.
Let's just talk about that for a second because that is the fundamental thing you're talking about is bringing a great team of people who are solving the problem as
Yeah.
close to the problem as you can.
So I'm not trying to optimize for this negotiation.
Yeah.
I'm trying to bring
Yeah.
it together I don't want to spend a lot of time getting fancy with the negotiation. I want to
Sure.
remove that.
In one of your posts, I saw you talk about a concept that I thought was really interesting where you described leverage. And I might be interpreting wrong, so I'd like you to check me
Yeah.
on this. But I feel like the best leverage you can get for a team is to maybe, instead of thinking about the technology or the scope of problems, is just to think about how close you can get them to the problem.
Yeah.
Like maybe that's the better framing of the engineering leader's job. Get these folks with the right skill level, of course, as close to the user challenge as I can.
Yeah. There's a couple things there. Like, one, if I get them close enough to the problem space, they will be able to see collectively with their partners there, oh, this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
It becomes almost super obvious. Like, you go, oh, no, we got to do this thing to contain this thing, but almost all our collective intelligence will point at something. It's still technically possible that we're wrong, but we have the least likelihood that we're wrong because we're collectively think that's
Right.
the way to go. Um,
Right.
there's a certain skill set here, right? Like, if we talk about engineering, not a technician, like
Mm-hmm.
engineering, it's like even old school engineering. Like, you're in the field, you're not in a
Sure.
lab. You're a tech, you're a scientist. You're not an engineer. Engineer, you make contact with the problem. Like, especially old school engineers, like, you barely had any math and
Yes.
everything.
Right.
Like, it looks super fancy now because we learn a lot of stuff. But
Yeah.
back in the day, it's like you just out there, you just deal with it, right? But
Right.
like that kind of mentality, so you're there, which means there's a certain skill set of being able to deal with the ambiguity of a real
Yeah.
problem as opposed to a like a lab controlled problem. Like that, there's a skill set expected there.
So I
Yeah,
love this point, which is get the folks as close as you can to the problem. That's where you get the leverage, and then it kind of solves these underlying. Should we use that tech or this tech or re-architect? Because again, you're just close to the problem on that. Give me your top three tactics for how you feel like you've seen that go well and how you've seen that go horribly wrong. They can't talk to customers, right? Like Office Space. There's all these middle layers that tend to exist in an organization explicitly that you have to sort of bust through to get
sure, sure. Yeah,
to those problems, right? And it's not
yeah.
by any fault, but the engineer's job is to build, not to.
I've met managers before who would say, like, it's not like they're not trying to be ineffective. They truly believe that, oh, this person's good at this, and I want to make sure they dedicate all their time on that skill, right?
Right.
So they're thinking of our game is to coordinate specialized technicians, and then we'll have coordination roles who will direct them correctly, right? It's funny because this is like old school 19th century manufacturing, right? But then they won't know that because they probably don't read or study management. I go, hey, you're reproducing this weird 19th century management approach, which you wouldn't have done if you read about it.
Right.
I have people who are specialized, they're good at the thing. I'm going to direct people to only do the things that they're really good at. And if I do that, therefore, I need some kind of management person to coordinate it because obviously you're going to need that
Yeah.
now because they don't have no exposure to the context. Now, here, like our approach, my approach, or the better thing is I'm actually saying, I want to be able to point you randomly in a general direction and you can handle it. That's my
Mm,
ideal. And then you say, hey,
right.
how do you build up to that?
How do you build up to that? That's what I want to know.
That it's staging up, right? Because you're saying maybe they're not ready for direct exposure, but I could still say, hey, what's your next thing? Like, even just talking more with your intermediaries first.
Right.
Just, oh, now you're going to be with the intermediary when they're having
Yeah.
that conversation. And
Yeah.
then, hey, maybe you're running that and they're just watching, helping facilitate that.
Right.
Right.
When you do that, do you feel like there's a language or a data set or a goal or something you have to communicate?
But I'm just going like the job is to solve the problem. This is not a university lab.
Right, right,
It's not.
right.
We're not
Yeah,
we're not here to have fun in grad school. That's not what this is. We're here to
yeah,
solve a problem. Like, this is like a mission of our organization. Grainger's like, we're here to keep the world working. That's the
yes,
problem, right?
yeah,
So which means you need to understand what's stopping people from able to do their job. And
yeah,
then we help them, we do that. But how the heck are you supposed to understand that if you're going through multiple layers of translation, right?
right.
Like, and I go, you got a technical background, you get this, right? You're going through
Yeah,
multiple layers of translation. Do you trust that signal? You want to get direct. Like, there's a little bit of kind of getting people's heads there because sometimes people don't do it not because they don't want to do it. It's just like they don't know how to do it. So there's
right. Yeah,
most people I would say who are in engineering, They do it because they want to solve a real problem. They don't
Yes.
want to waste their time doing stuff that effectively was pointless. Like, I
Right.
built a thing, no one's ever going to use it. You might as well have tossed it. Your life has no meaning. Like, it's no, most people, that's not appealing at all.
Yeah.
So here we're kind of saying, hey, we're gonna give you an opportunity and even the trust too, because there's this kind of buildup of trust to say, no, I'm gonna say, here's this thing. I'm not gonna even tell you how to solve it because you have the capability. Just take a look there and tell me how we
Yeah.
deal with this.
I feel like one of your posts, there was kind of a controversial McKinsey article on developer productivity,
Yeah.
and you had a really good analysis. It was one of your most popular posts. Again, encourage people to go find it. And I think a conclusion I took away from it was you really try to help the team focus on outcomes,
Yeah.
which I feel like is really the spirit of what you're just saying. There tends to be, and maybe I'm trying to bring this full circle here, it's very tempting to say, how much, things did this person produce?
Yeah.
Not say, what was the problem they solved? That's a shift in thinking that
Yeah.
doesn't, it's quite hard practically because we're so tempted to measure everything in a way that's that. So let's say you do everything you do with the great team you have and they're close to the problems and all those pieces. It's sometimes a little hard to say we solved the problem or we had this great outcome. How do you try to set up measurements of an outcome?
There's the two things that pop in my head. Like, one, I think people in the, at least the extreme programming background, like we have
Yeah.
like test first, test driven development, and this just feels very similar to that. I still get people who go, "How can I write the test? I haven't written any code yet." I'm going, "What are you talking about?" But some
Right.
of that, like, I realize that's because I've been kind of trained that habit for like 20 plus years. I always start with, "Hey, here, what am I trying to do?" And then I
Yeah.
work out how to do it. Imagine we magically completed this feature and it produced the outcome that we're looking for. How could we tell? That's all I'm saying.
Mm, yeah.
Are you sure you know what you're doing?
Right.
That means you don't know, you don't really understand the problem. This is a great thing about Grainger because I get this coming from other people too, which I go, oh, excellent. Because they'll say, hey, what problem are you trying to solve? And I say, yeah, that's a good question. I should have thought about that. So you go, yeah, so what problem are you trying to solve? But like, to understand a problem, it's not just, hey, I have an answer to that question. It's that I know very clearly what it looks like when the problem is solved,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You could say, I'm going to introduce something that I'm going to see an observable behavior change in a user, a customer, or in a process or something. I can see that.
Right.
Now,
Right.
there's a logic, like the broader logic is if I get people to engage in that behavior, it'll produce this impact financially,
Yes.
right? That we check, I'll get some analysts to monitor that over a few months, which means I can't use that as a product development thing, or at least not a day to day thing, right?
Yeah.
There's some time, like at small scale, you can see it immediately. At large scale, if you have enough people, you can see it.
I think the really great soundbite there as the conclusion is setting the team up to measure outcomes.
Know what problem you're solving, right?
Right.
Like, you can't say, I understand this problem if you don't know what it looks like when it's solved. That means you're not clear about
Right.
what the problem is yet.
It's an interesting conclusion to think about here of really shifting the thinking of engineering leadership as hard as we can into outcomes. I think that's a great takeaway. I love the sort of laddering up to that method of thinking about that. Like, I have a team today of those who are listening here who maybe are trying to get there, and it's not like you can do that overnight, but just slowly kind of move in that direction to think about the distance from the problem and the distance from the customer and try to put that over time in a smaller way. Um, those all feel like really solid ways to bring focus back and to kind of have that leverage you were talking about. So, Jason, great. Loved the conversation. Again, thanks for your time.
Thank you.